It was supposed to be a regular segment. Steve Harvey stepped onto his talk show stage, flashing his signature smile. The audience cheered as he opened with laughter and energy. Today's topic? The power of purpose. He had just finished, sharing a personal story about growing up in poverty when a production assistant briskly approached, whispering something in his ear. Steve looked confused, then surprised, then silent. He turned to the camera, cleared his throat, and said, Folks, I've just been told there's a very special message for me, and it's coming from somewhere I never expected." Screen behind him lit up with a golden seal and the words, "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso." The studio fell into complete stillness. Not a whisper, not a cough. Steve sat down, stunned. "The president of Burkina Faso. I don't even know what this is about." He leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. The video began. Simple wooden desk. A warm sunlit room. The flag of Burkina Faso behind a man with strong eyes and a calm voice. President Ibrahim Traoré. "Mr. Steve Harvey," he began in gently accented English. "I speak to you not just as a leader, but as a brother." The studio leaned in. "You don't know me. Oh, we know you. In the villages of Burkina Faso, your voice reaches farther than you imagine. Your words of faith, second chances, and strength have touched people you'll never meet." Steve blinked. His hands began to tremble. The president's voice grew more emotional. "During our darkest nights, when war threatened our peace, your story gave me hope. You reminded me that leadership is not about titles. It is about heart." The room was frozen. Then Traoré looked directly into the camera. "From a soldier who rose to lead his people. Nothing in America. I thank you." Steve's lips parted, but no words came out. Only the glimmer of tears. For the first time in a long time, Steve Harvey was speechless. He reached for a tissue. The message continued. "I've watched you cry for others. Laugh with strangers. Give to those who thought they were forgotten. In my country, we call that kind of soul a heart of the sun. Warm, brave, giving light." Steve finally whispered, "Wow." The message was not political. It was personal. "This message is not about governments," Traoré said. "It is about purpose." The screen faded to black. Then the president's voice returned, briefly speaking in more the native language of Burkina Faso. Steve turned to his team. "What did he just say?" A translator stood up softly. He said, "Even the strongest man needs to be reminded that his voice still matters." Steve covered his face. The crowd wept quietly. Even the cameraman's hands shook. This wasn't a TV moment. It was a spiritual exchange to men, connected by struggle, dignity, and purpose. Steve sat in silence, hands folded, eyes glistening. After a long pause, he finally looked up. "You never think your words go that far. You just try to be real, try to survive, try to help." The audience clapped gently, but Steve raised his hand. "No, this ain't about applause. This is about purpose." Backstage, producers whispered about cutting to commercial. Steve refused. "I want the world to hear every second of this. Don't stop the feed." Then the screen flickered again, but this time, it wasn't a recording. It was live. President Ibrahim Traoré, speaking directly from Ouagadougou, appeared on the screen. Steve gasped. "Mr. Harvey," Traoré said with a smile, "for once. Let me speak to you man to man, not from one country to another, from one dreamer to another." The audience leaned forward again, breathless. "You see me now as a president," Traoré said, "but I was once a boy with no shoes. I walked barefoot to school, carried books tied with string, slept hungry many nights." Steve lowered his head, his shoulders shook. "As a teenager, I saw war. I saw fear. I saw people give up, but I also saw something else. I saw you. One day, in a crowded internet cafe, I watched a video of you. You said, 'Don't give up.' I didn't understand all your words, but I understood your tears. I understood your pain. I understood your hope." Steve looked up stunned. "You helped a young boy in Burkina Faso believe he could be more than his pain. That boy became me." The crowd gasped. Some cried openly. Traoré smiled gently. So, when I heard your voice again last week, speaking about purpose, I knew it was time I said something back. Steve covered his face again. And then, Traoré said something even Steve couldn't believe. Mr. Harvey, he continued, you once said you wanted to visit Africa, not as a celebrity, but as a brother, as someone who wants to give back. Steve nodded, voice shaking. Yes, I did. The president smiled. Then I invite you personally to Burkina Faso, not for cameras, not for attention, but to see what your voice has built in silence. You've lifted spirits across oceans. Let me show you the seeds you've planted in our soil. Steve's hands trembled. He didn't know whether to speak or cry. And then the words that broke him were simple. There's a young orphanage in Ouagadougou, the president said. The children there know your name. They pray with your words. They laugh at your jokes. But most of all, they believe they matter. Because you mattered. Steve Harvey stood, eyes flooded with tears. The audience rose with him, clapping softly. Many were wiping their own eyes. But President Ibrahim Traoré wasn't finished. He looked into the lens and added, in 7 days, they'll gather. In the village square, waiting to meet the man whose words crossed oceans and healed hearts, the countdown had begun. The very next morning, Steve Harvey was already packing. No cameras, no press, just him, a carry-on, and a heart full of questions. The world was buzzing. Every major news outlet ran headlines. President of Burkina Faso moves Steve Harvey to tears. A message that crossed oceans, but Steve wasn't going for the headlines. He wasn't going for fame. He was going for the kids. A voice that had spoken straight to his soul. As his plane soared across the Atlantic, he stared out the window. Memories surfaced growing up poor in Cleveland. Nights when food was scarce, dreams that always felt too big. Now he was flying to Africa, called by a president who had once known that same pain. He whispered, God, why me? He didn't know what to expect. Would the children recognize him? Would he be strong enough to face them? Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, President Traoré stood before a group of children gathered in a sunlit courtyard. He's coming, he said with a smile. The children erupted in cheers, but in the back one little girl didn't cheer. She had tears in her eyes. Name was Acha. She was 10 years old, small, soft-spoken, wise beyond her years. She clutched a worn notebook in trembling hands and whispered to her caretaker, Will he read it? Will he care? The caretaker knelt beside her and smiled gently. He already cares more than most. Inside Acha's notebook was a short letter, small in size but infinite in heart. Dear Mr. Steve, my name is Acha. My papa died. 2 years ago, my mama is sick. Sometimes I cry at night, but one day someone played your video. You said you were born to do something great. I believed you. Thank you for speaking to us, even if you didn't know we were listening. I hope you smile when you see us, your little sister, Acha. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, children practiced songs. Some drew pictures with Steve's name. Hope hung in the air like music. But Acha sat silently beneath a mango tree, notebook pressed to her chest. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about politics. It was about a man who once slept in a car, and a child who sometimes slept without dinner. And somewhere above them the sky seemed to whisper. They were meant to find each other. The plane touched down just after noon. Steve Harvey stepped out, shielding his eyes from the African sun.
Ow.
No flashing cameras. No grand parade. Just a young aide holding a hand-painted sign. Welcome home, Brother Steve. His heart thudded, faster, louder. Inside a nearby van, he was driven through the city. Simple homes, open markets. Children waved as they passed. But nothing could prepare him for what he saw at the orphanage gates. Over 100 children were waiting, holding handmade signs. You matter. Thank you, Mr. Steve. We love you. Tears welled in Steve's eyes. President Traoré stepped forward, not in a suit but in a white shirt and traditional cloth. He embraced Steve tightly. Welcome home, he whispered. Steve couldn't speak. And then a small voice rose from the crowd. Steve, what's Acha? She walked forward slowly, clutching the notebook with trembling hands. This is for you, she whispered. Steve knelt. He opened the notebook, read her letter, and then he wept, uncontrollably. And every single person there knew this wasn't a visit. It was a divine appointment. Back in the U.S., during a commercial break, Steve sat motionless. The message from President Traoré had just aired. A producer approached, gently handing him a printed translation of the full message. "Steve, you'll want to read this part," she whispered. His eyes scanned the page slowly. "When I was a boy, hiding under my grandmother's market table, I'd hear her laugh while listening to your voice through a crackling radio. She didn't speak English, but your spirit made her smile. In the middle of hard days, that voice helped raise me." Steve covered his mouth. "Oh my God." The camera light came back on, but Steve didn't force a smile. He looked into the lens, tears falling. This world, it's smaller than we think, and our words, they travel farther than we'll ever know. Studio sat in stunned silence. But Steve didn't realize this was only the beginning. After the segment, Steve stepped off stage. He was supposed to prep for the next guest, but something in his spirit refused. Walked into his dressing room, picked up his phone. "Get me a line to Ouagadougou," he told his producer. "I want to speak to President Traoré today." 2 hours later, a secure Zoom link opened, and there he was. President Ibrahim Traoré, calm, humble, his eyes full of warmth. Steve's voice cracked. "Mr. President, I'm just a comedian from Cleveland. I never imagined my voice would reach someone like you." Traoré smiled. "And I'm just a soldier who loves his people. But even soldiers need hope. You gave me that now.
Ow.
I want to give something back." Steve leaned in. "What do you mean?" Traoré spoke softly. "Come back to Burkina Faso. Just for one day. There's someone I want you to meet." Steve froze. He had no idea that one sentence would change his life forever. That night, Steve barely slept. One line from the letter haunted him. "That voice helped raise me." He thought of his own mother, the one who once told him he was destined for something greater. He remembered a prayer he whispered long ago during a hard season. "God, if I ever get famous, let my words mean something to someone who truly needs them." And now, this. Later that night, Steve went live on social media. No jokes, no applause. Just a man with a truth he couldn't hold in anymore. He held up a cause's letter, and then looked into the camera. "Y'all, I've been blessed. With money, with fame. But this message from a little girl in Burkina Faso, it's the reason I started. It's the reason I'm not done yet." "A leader I never met," Steve Harvey said quietly, holding a letter in his hands. "A boy raised by a grandmother who couldn't understand me, but felt me. That's God." He paused. "I made a promise once. I'm keeping it." And with those words, Steve made a decision. He was going to Burkina Faso. Not for TV, not for ratings, but for something far more sacred. Steve boarded a private flight to Ouagadougou with a heavy heart and an open spirit. It was his first time visiting Burkina Faso. No press, no camera crew, just Steve, his assistant, a translator, and a journal he hadn't written in for years. As the plane climbed, he sat by the window, gripping the translated letter from President Ibrahim Traoré. One line, underlined in red, echoed in his mind. "I wish my mother could have seen the man you helped me become." Abe leaned back in his seat and whispered, "What did I do to deserve this honor?" Mid-flight, his assistant handed him a sealed envelope. A wax stamp marked the front. Inside was a handwritten note from Traoré. "When you land, don't think like a celebrity. Think like a son, coming home." Steve pressed the letter to his chest. He didn't know what waited for him on the other side, but deep down, he knew. This trip was about healing. He arrived just as the sun rose over Ouagadougou. The airport was quiet, no reporters, no applause, just 2 black SUVs. One tall figure waiting by the car door. President Ibrahim Traoré. Steve descended the stairs, unsure of what to say. Traoré didn't speak. He simply walked forward and embraced him like a brother. No words, just presence. "You came," Traoré finally said. "I had to," Steve replied. Their first stop wasn't the palace. It was the market. Of sun-weathered stalls stood like old storytellers, filled with fruits, cloth, and spices. Traoré led Steve to a collapsed wooden stall in the back. "This," he said, "was my grandmother's, right here. This is where I listened to you on a crackling radio, helping her count coins." Steve stood silently, staring at the dust. The president knelt, picked up a small rock, and placed it in Steve's palm. "This is where hope began." Steve couldn't hold it in. He cried quietly. So did Traoré. From there, they drove an hour outside the capital to a small village shaded by trees. A group of women waited under a mango tree. One stepped forward, frail, slow-moving, eyes wise with years. "This is Awa," Traoré said. "She's the only one still alive who used to sit with my grandmother during market days. She remembers you." Steve blinked. But how Traoré smiled. They didn't understand your English, but they felt your joy. Awa used to say that man has a heart that speaks louder than his tongue. The translator repeated Awa's words as she touched Steve's face gently. "My sister. Your voice gave her strength. When she wanted to give up, your laughter kept her selling." Then she whispered something soft and more. The translator paused, choked with emotion. She said, "If my sister had met you, she would have fed you. She would have called you her son." In that moment, Steve Harvey was not a star. He was a son, being welcomed home by a mother he never knew he had. That evening, Steve visited a small rural school. There were no cameras, just soft drums, dusty benches, and dozens of children, nervous but smiling. When Steve entered, the children began singing a tune in Moor. The translator leaned in and whispered, "This song, it's what President Traoré's grandmother used to hum while she cooked. Now the children sing it in her honor." Steve froze. He knew the melody. "I remember this," he whispered. "My grandma, in Cleveland. She used to hum something just like this when I cried." Traoré stood beside him. "Our grandmothers," he said softly. "They gave us the same comfort, thousands of miles apart." Steve sat on the bench. A child placed a small wooden carving in his hands. 2 hands holding a heart. Broke down, openly, loudly. Years of pain, years of questions, released in a place he'd never expected. The boy from Cleveland, the boy from Ouagadougou, now 2 men bonded by love, memory, and the voices of women who raised them. Before Steve returned to the U.S., President Traoré had one last request. They met on a small plot of land just outside the capital. A single tree stood in the center, surrounded by sunflowers. Traoré handed Steve a rolled certificate tied with a red ribbon. "This land now belongs to you," he said. "A place of peace, a gift from Burkina Faso. Whenever you feel tired or lost, you'll have a home here." Steve shook his head, overwhelmed. "I didn't come for a gift. I came because your letter made me feel human again." Traoré nodded. "And you made my people feel seen. That's worth more than gold." They stood under the tree, wind brushing their faces. Then Traoré did something no one expected. He knelt, placed his hand over Steve's heart. "I don't kneel for many," he said, "but I kneel for hearts that change lives." Steve fell to his knees too. There, under a tree in West Africa, 2 powerful men wept like little boys, who missed their grandmothers and had finally found each other in the pain. Steve returned to the U.S. the next day. No fanfare, no headlines, just a quiet soul with a full heart. On his next show, Steve walked on stage, holding the wooden carving, 2 hands holding a heart. He placed it on his desk, looked into the camera. "I've received awards, I've received honors, but nothing like this." His voice cracked. "I met a man, president, not just of a country, but of the human heart. Ibrahim Traoré reminded me that love, honor, and memory are stronger than anything fame can give you." He paused. "He called me a son of Africa. I call him my brother." Then Steve did something rare. Played the children's song. No translation, just voices. Pure, innocent, joyful. Millions watched. Millions cried. Not for spectacle, but for truth. They didn't see politics. They saw love. They saw legacy. They saw healing.